at this issue. It's not so much about how we see ourselves. It also has to be understood as to how we are seen. And the perception that's out there is that we are a race. And the proof of that is that the rhetoric that is being used about us is racialized. And this is something that is a common feature when we take a look at other religions and how they have been dealt with in the United States. The Catholics were not seen as a religion per se. They were seen as a race. Because if you look at the rhetoric against Catholics 100 years ago, and if you look at that which is being said about Muslims, if you have a word processor, all you have to do is do a find and replace, and it's basically the same thing. It's about as unoriginal as Melania Trump in her speeches. I saw a great meme. It said, very pleased to meet you, Michelle. And then she said, very pleased to meet you, Michelle. She even borrowed from Michelle in meeting at the White House. There were an awful lot of measures that were taken against Catholics. The Blaine Amendments, for example, specifically targeted them. The Jewish community was subject to quotas for decades. In fact, one of the reasons why the University of Michigan became such a magnet for Jews living on the East Coast was that it was the closest university to the East Coast that didn't impose quotas but still had a high academic rating. And there are cases where until the 1960s there were really no Jews on the faculty. So you see that there have been times where this has affected other communities as well. The one common denominator as to how they came out of it was engagement. They made themselves vital, they made themselves indispensable, and they made themselves in that capacity without necessarily asserting their religious identity as being one that required their emancipation or their inclusion alone. If you take a look, for example, at the freedom marches during the Civil Rights Movement, it was blacks and Jews marching together. In fact, a case that's behind Mississippi Burning in 1962, where you had Schorner, Cheney, and Goodman. One African American and two Jewish activists went down to the South to try to register or help black Americans to get to the voting booth because they were being denied because of Jim Crow laws and all, and they were all murdered as a result of that. They became part of the American fabric. Similar when it comes to Catholics, they were taking positions that other people did not want to take. That's why there's the whole idea about Irish Catholic police officers and Irish Catholics in the fire department. They became embedded within the American fabric. Now, inshallah, I mean, Muslims will go through that. I mean, it's almost like going through a tunnel of fire, and we will come out the other end. Every group inevitably does. It's not an easy one, but it shows you that the natural reflex to hide and to become closeted is not the approach. And what makes the Muslim situation perhaps more promising than those of other groups that came before us is that the coalitions already exist. I think it's really interesting now. I mean, for example, Bernie Sanders included Muslims in his description of saying, you're not going to do this to America and to Americans. So you're not going to go after African Americans, you're not going to go after Latinos. He's including Muslims within that group. Now, in order for that to happen, Muslims have to be regarded as being a race, like Latinos, like African Americans. And I think that we have to be willing to allow that categorization of us, because that's just how America works. America just simply sees itself and sees its own people through the lens of race primarily, not religion.
Just add to this, there is a Supreme Court decision actually in 1986 that the Jews are a race, this is actually for protective decision actually, and many Jews actually don't feel very much discomfortable with the fact that they are a race, because this was the rhetoric used by the Nazis to justify persecuting Jews that are not of us, that are strangers. But as Said said, this is what it is, whether we like it or not, whether we consider this to be true or not. People on the media, in the public, rhetoric, they never distinguish between Sunnis and Shias, a practicing Muslim, non-practicing Muslim. All these things do not matter. One Muslim name is good for everybody.
Yeah, it was just a comment about the opening video that we showed. I felt very much what Van Jones was talking when that happened, but I think that in the context of what's happened since, what we know now, I think it's unfair because that creates a bit of anxiety and hysteria. It's scary that Trump's in the White House, absolutely, but I feel uncomfortable with the idea that we look at our fellow citizens and feel a sense of apprehension. That whitewash didn't really happen. It was the same percentage of white people that voted for Romney in 2012 voted for Trump in 2016. Where you saw a difference was there were far less Black and Latino voters that came out for Hillary. I think that's more of her issue, but I think that it's important for us to recognize the fact that we're not like everybody didn't just go and throw a hood over their heads and we need to be scared. It's almost the same exact. What happened was the white voters all stood still while the Latino and Black community took one step back.
I think the point that Salman was making is that, referring back to the video, and let me see if I get this right, is that, and remember, Van Jones was speaking right, as the elections are going, so this was real time, and he was certainly responding to that, about whether this was really a white lash, and a sort of a racialized rejection of one side of the electoral aisle. And it's a much more complicated thing than that. That if you look at the numbers, this wasn't as though there was the rise of whiteness to reject America changing. That, I think, is an important fact, especially when you're talking about the fact that there was now a decrease in the number of African American and Latinos who were voting. They just stayed home. Whereas in 2012, because Romney was a Mormon, a lot of evangelicals stayed home because they felt that it was inimical to their sensitivities to vote for essentially what the evangelicals consider the Mormons to be the Ahmadis of Christianity. Just to use it as an analogy, I'm not making any value judgment here. But that was the conceit upon which they stayed home. So basically what we're having is then, and remember, only 43% of the population voted. That the decision, Trump got 23% of the vote of the entire country. So that also should provide you with some understanding of the scale and the scope of who supported him. You can do the numbers and go ahead and say, well, how much of that percentage are really racist and how many of them are Islamophobes? Of course, at the same time, one is too many if they're an Islamophobe. But I think the point that you're raising is really important to say, we need to go ahead and assess this as time goes by now, instead of still holding on to Van Jones's reflexive action right after the election.
On the same point, those who vote for Trump, we shouldn't look at them all as the same. Some of them did not want to vote for Hillary. Some of them, their concern is the Supreme Court. They disagree with Trump. So we shouldn't lump them all in. So those 23, we might end up smaller percentage than that.
Yeah. This point about why people voted and whether it was an affirmative vote or whether it was a rejection, I think one of the things that's also very important to recognize about how we make our decisions. Yes, it's nice that there's a lot of Muslims who are now in Washington. I know almost all of them who are inside the Beltway, who are either inside the administration and who are very well-intended people. But I can also tell you that you get inside Washington and you are shut off from the rest of reality. Most people on the East Coast don't actually come to the Midwest. They fly over the Midwest, going somewhere else. They have a mentality where they are driven by only being around people who think like them, who act like them, who do like them, and then it's about trying to stay in a position. Why the people in Washington now are in such shock is because they're out of a job starting in January. They are not going to be part of the administration. They're not going to be part of the government at all, as they are political appointments. We fell for the oldest trick in the book, that we were listening to them and getting our assessment about these things without them paying attention. So in a sense, what we are doing is we're guilty of taqlid. We're guilty of simply going ahead and listening to them without actually thinking, is this right? And Hillary was the thing, whether it's because of Huma or whether it is because of other people who she was able to appoint or things sounded well. Other people had great anxiety about her. Other people had a real issue with the way that she was running the campaign, with some of her positions. She was certainly not an ideal candidate. And in many ways, we stopped doing our own homework, is the point. We simply went ahead and went along because it was easier to do so. It didn't require us to do too much intellectual heavy lifting. And so, honesty requires us to take some of the accountability for that, at a time when I can tell you even her own staff is not doing that. So lesson learned as we move forward. I think the one point to come off what you're saying, Brother Jihad, and also Salman here, is that... I'm sorry. Is we are becoming more sophisticated as people understanding the political and the civic landscape. Now the point I think that was made by Hassan earlier is also so important. Right before the election I was invited to Dallas to give 2 talks. One was at Sheikh Omar Suleiman's Masjid, Valley Ranch, and the other at East Plano Islamic Center, this $10 million super masjid. And what was interesting is, especially at the East Plano Masjid, I was struck by how little people understood about the political process. They were very gracious enough to admit that if Obama walked into the East Plano Islamic Center, they would have asked him if he could help them get a zoning variance for an expansion. And if the Drain Commissioner walked in seeking re-election, they would have asked him what's his position on Palestine. Yeah, that's not a good thing. And so I said, right, you have to know who to talk to, you have to understand the system. And they said, we want the help. Can you fly in every weekend and give us a talk? I'm like, yeah, I'm not doing that. It's too many trips to Dallas, and I hate Dallas. The point... What's that?
You hate Dallas, but I'm from Dallas.
Okay, I'm glad for you. But now you're here.
I'm sorry to barge into this conversation, but if we're going to talk about being honest with ourselves, then it's very important to see the causal nexus between Trump's vilifying offensive remarks for the last year and a half and what's transpiring in our own backyards for the last 48 hours. To sit here and be dismissive of that and not to see that causal nexus and not to acknowledge it, I think we're just lying to our community. So I want to pose a question to the community at large, or the leaders that be. What measures are we taking to establish hotlines or have some effective strategies for our communities to feel safe and to have an avenue for them to feel included in this process? And we can sit here and have these dialogues and conversations, but we need to have practical measures to feel safe.
Yeah, the practical measures actually were discussed earlier. And in fact, there's plenty of literature here to show what CARE and other organizations have. We also had Sister Saba, I guess I can call her sister, yeah, who were presenting that. I don't think that anybody has discounted, and I don't think anybody has been dismissive about the causal nexus of which you speak. In fact, I think earlier on we talked about that.
I just heard it from a couple of gentlemen here. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and pretend like that wasn't done.
I don't understand what you say you didn't hear if you weren't here to not hear it.
No, I was here when that discussion took place.
Yeah, but this discussion's been going on for the last hour and a half.
I understand. Yeah. I've been here, and I was here for the remarks that were just made in regards to the white populace or the white nationalists or evangelists not having a role to play in Trump's rise to prominence. So I have a question.
I don't think anybody said that.
So that claim is not being refuted.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I just heard it happening, so I just wanted to see clarification.
Okay, was that something that you said?
That wasn't the implication. I could talk to you that offline, brother. What I meant.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
You know, we've been talking about the troubles the man can give to others, but I want to just spin that conversation around. What troubles await him, the next president of the United States? I mean, his Trump University fraud case starts in a month and a half, right? His tax evasion thing is waiting for him, although some people say that he is going to appoint a new IRS commissioner who's going to just look the other way.
It's going to be huge, yeah.
Yeah, and then there's all these skeletons of a man who's got money. Some of it has come out, such as sexual harassment cases, and I'm sure there's many more. I mean, I'm just wondering whether the man would be able to even complete his own term.
Right,
Or
okay.
if he was able to, would he be able to even have any strength to do anything? He could be just distracted 7 different ways
Right.
as he goes through this.
Okay, that's a good question. So let me just actually finish up because I didn't get a chance to finish up on the point I was making about East Plano. One of the things that came out very clearly was the importance of programming. And like Hassan said before, this idea of swooping in 4 days before an election and giving a crash course and a pep talk on civic and political engagement is not going to cut it. So a couple of the possible recommendations that we're trying to work on is include a civics class within weekend and Sunday school curricula so that kids from an early age become acclimated to this idea of how our government works, because we are deluded into thinking that this is something that is presented coherently and completely in high school. I mean, most kids take 1 year of US history and maybe 1 semester of government, and then they rush through that and then they're done. Because of course taking any more is going to impinge in their pre-med classes. The other thing is, it's not just about the kids. We as adults need to be civically savvy. So perhaps having quarterly discussions like this built into the programming of Masajid and all. It was nice to hear that East Plano and Valley Ranch were in fact interested in having that kind of programming. So inshallah, that's something that we can actually then concretize into the curriculum. Now, regarding your question about Trump and the challenges that he faces, right now there's so much uncertainty. We hear now drips and drabs of what he seems to be intending by this cabinet, which is going to look like the Gestapo. Mike Rogers as CIA director, Giuliani as Attorney General, Kelly Ayotte or Michael Flynn as the Department of Defense Secretary, Ben Carson as Secretary of Education, Sarah Palin as Interior Secretary, gotta love that one.
And forgetting Newt Gingrich.
And Gingrich as Secretary of State, God help us all, who wants to also bring back the House Un-American Affairs Committee. The way I see it is that there's 2 big issues that Trump has. One is that now they own the entire, they own Washington. They have every branch of government, and of course now they're going to nominate somebody who will be at no worse than Scalia. So the Supreme Court will be like that for a while, and God keep Ruth Bader Ginsburg alive for us to make sure that there's the balance on the court. But now that they own everything, they have a huge burden of delivering. They were able to exploit all these people and their passions and their emotions, saying, I'm going to do this for you, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make America great, I'm going to get you back your jobs. So here's an example. Out of the 50 states, in 29 states, the #1 occupation is truck driving. Okay? That's the most common occupation in 29 of 50 states. 2 weeks ago, a Budweiser truck was made self-driving. Okay? So imagine in 10 years, 20 years, what's going to happen to the trucking industry in this country. Now, and I'm not trying to make any kind of value judgment about truck drivers, but I'm pretty sure that the vast majority of them didn't vote for Hillary, Jill Stein, or Gary Johnson. So those are people who thought that they're going to have a better America because of the promise. This isn't a job that's going to be taken away by a Latino or by an African American or a Muslim. It's going to be taken away by a robot. None of that was explained in the situation or in the campaign, or this idea about nullifying NAFTA, changing all of the supply chain, and bringing jobs back to the United States. Okay, bring back the factories. The factories are all going to be automated. So what's going to happen to those people? Or the Iran deal, the other great deal that he's going to go ahead and smash because it was the worst deal in the world until, of course, Obamacare, and then until NAFTA. Iran right now has a 900 plane deficit for its commercial aviation market. 900 planes. There's only 4 major companies that make planes. There's Bombardier out of Canada, there is Embraer out of Brazil, they make the little regional jets. The big planes are Airbus and Boeing. Now let's say Boeing makes 100 planes by contract a year. That's a good year for Boeing. You get half of the planes that Iran needs. You get 450 planes or an order of that, you're set for 2 generations. Okay? Because it's not just the planes that are being built in factories, it is tech, it is maintenance people, it is service people, it is corporate jobs, it's engineers. In Everett, Washington, Long Beach, California, Wichita, Kansas, and the corporate offices in Chicago. Now, you're promising to bring back jobs, and you're also promising to gut a major deal that was signed. You're not going to be able to deliver on both. If you want the jobs, keep the deal. If you want to scrap the deal, you're not going to get those jobs. So you've got conflicting promises that are going to be a real quagmire for people. And then not only that, there's still no consensus that half of the things that he wants to do are part of the Republican mantra. So you're going to have these clashes with Paul Ryan and with some of these other people who are saying, what are you trying to do, man? I have to go back to my district, and I've got all these corporations, and you're going to go ahead and try to demand from corporations things that corporations haven't liked to have happen. I think that for the other side, instead of blocking deals in Congress, I think they should all buy a big popcorn maker and just sit there and eat popcorn while the Republicans duke it out. Because, as Hassan said, 2018, all the Congress people are going to be up for re-election. And this group of people have now become ginned up to an expectation that he's going to make America great again sooner rather than later. Whether he's going to be able to deliver that on a 2-year timetable or a 4-year timetable or an 8-year timetable, it's just not going to happen. And by the way, if it does happen and he makes America great again, I'm not sure how much we can necessarily complain about that.
Just to blame Donald Trump or the Islamophobia machine that's been working for years?
So who's to blame about whether it's Trump or the Islamophobia industry? I'm skittish about assigning blame because I think it's too easy to go ahead and just look at one figure or an industry. I think what's more interesting as an analysis is what is it that makes people react to it and respond to Islamophobia and someone like Trump. That is, Islamophobia is a symptom of a bigger disease, and Trump is simply maybe the typhoid Mary of that disease. I think we have to look deeper into what is it about American society that causes these anxieties, these moral panics. Otherwise, this is just going to keep happening again and again, because this is not the first time that these kinds of anxieties have hit us.
Just a comment about Trump having the Senate and the House. They can own Washington and do whatever they want to do. When Obama came in the office in 2004, he had the Senate and the House.
2008.
2008.
Yeah.
And he hardly accomplished anything in the first 2 years.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was because there was Mitch McConnell, who was the leader of the Republicans then, he says, we're just not going to let him succeed. I mean, and they just simply put the skids onto Washington.
I just want to make a very quick comment on these 2 questions. One regarding racism, and this is also one of the brothers made a comment. This nobody here at all said that evangelical groups or white supremacists did not contribute to the victory of Donald Trump. Nobody says that, but I think what I understood from the discussion here is that that was not the only factor. It's one of multiple factors that led to this. Also regarding the challenges facing Donald Trump, I think we should actually think of ourselves as one of these challenges. Yes, there are plenty of challenges, Said explained, and more coming from his own party and from others, but we need to think about ourselves as a pressure group. People stand for justice. People stand for equality, for human dignity and human rights. We can be this pressure, and I'm sure he heard and saw the demonstrations of thousands of people demonstrating against him because of where he stands. And I think, strongly believe that those who casually give promises to attract more voters, they know exactly, as a businessman, he knows what people want to hear. And he's very good in this. How much he'll be successful, as some people said that nobody expected him to win, and he did. You never know. Everything is well. It's very difficult to be certain about what will or what will not happen.
So my question is this, okay? Yeah, it is what it is. Okay? Is there anything that we can do reaching out to this Trump and his team, not me, but as a community, so that they better understand our situation and what can we do more and how to look at them?
The question is, what can we do about it as far as to make Trump and his team understand better? Should we reach out to them? I don't think that outreach is ever wrong. I think it's a matter of what posture do we take. I don't think that we need to go hat in hand in an inferior position or a subordinate position or seem as though we're begging for his approval, as though he's going to change his mind about how he feels about us. I think, though, that the way that Washington works and the way that the system of government is that you actually don't have to do that much heavy lifting in order to move things around. You know, this is like when you're moving a couch. You can buy those things that they show at 2 o'clock in the morning, those little devices that you put under the legs, and it makes it easier to move the couch. That's all we really need. Now, for anything that he wants to try to do that is too drastic and that's too extreme, and that's really what we're talking about here when it comes to how it's targeting groups like Muslims and others. If he's planning on trying to get Congress to pass some of these laws, all you need to do is find 4 or 5 moderate Republicans in the Senate. That's it. The way that the composition of the Senate is right now, all you need is a few who are either going to be up for re-election in 2018 or 2020, who are going to be vulnerable. And vulnerability comes down to a matter of looking at what kind of demographic groups are in those states. If they're coming from a place like Texas, where there are large communities that could be affected by this legislation, form coalitions with those communities, and then go ahead and make sure that you can exert pressure or influence on those Republican senators to flip. I mean, there are such senators that are there right now. Not everybody, by any stretch of the imagination, agrees with his full agenda. It has to be a matter of playing it smart, and it has to be a matter of playing it in a long-term strategy.
I was going to say too that there was actually just today a friend of mine, actually an old teacher, had mentioned, and he was just saying, going old school and writing letters to our congressmen and senators and congratulating them and introducing yourself. And I mean, we used to do this in the 2000s, and not electronic, like actually writing a letter and showing that, you know, we matter, we're their constituents and we matter. And exactly what Professor Seed's saying, but that we do have a voice, and making that known, not being complacent. Did you guys say that?
No, I was going to say, what's a letter? Sorry.
Not an email. Comment on, kind of like the comment over there about what we do next. And I think if there's not one answer to what we've got to do next, we got to think about many different ways that we can attack this issue. I think we have plenty of people in our community that are registered Republicans. I would suggest, perhaps what we need is an offsite, a good discussion, a good strategy session where we bring those folks in and we think about how they can approach the Republican Party with our voice. Right? That's one way. I think you suggested the second way, which is to build a coalition with other folks that don't feel good about Trump being there. Right? There may be a number of different ways that we can attack it, but I think we've got to approach this in a number of different ways. And there's no reason for us to commit to just one way of how to attack this problem and how to get Trump, how to fix the problem. We're not going to fix it all at once. So I think we have to come up with a number of different ways.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think Steph's suggestion about a multi-pronged approach is absolutely critical. There is no one pathway, and there is also no full employment on this thing. There is plenty of work to be done, and everybody can have a contribution. It's remarkable how much just a discussion with somebody can change someone's mind. And I have not been trying to go ahead and flip somebody on saying, oh, you're an idiot that you voted for Trump, or you are the devil for voting for Trump, or how could you do this stuff? I co-teach a course at Rochester College on Tuesdays and Fridays in the fall term, which is an evangelical college here, a course on Christian-Muslim dialogue. And I simply mentioned to some of these students, because I knew their background, come from working class background, I said, listen, my problem with Trump is less about how he feels about me than about the fact that he sold you a really questionable bill of goods. And they said, well, what do you mean? And I gave them the example that I gave you about the auto industry and about automation and things like that. And I can tell you that the blood left their face because they said, we never realized that because nobody ever told us that. I said, look, I'm not talking down to you. And they said, that's part of the problem. They said, one of the things that happened in this election is everybody on the other side talked down to us. Nobody spoke to us as though we were human beings and that we had dignity. Everyone thought of us as being a bunch of Duck Dynasty, Bible-toting, gun-slinging, NASCAR-watching, ignorant fools. And what's tragic is that we work with people who come from those backgrounds, or their parents came from those backgrounds, or they have people in those families, or they're your patients, or they're your clients. And this idea that we have this dismissive attitude against them that, okay, they're fine, we'll tolerate their ignorance as long as their insurance covers it, is malpractice of a different kind. The idea of actually having a conversation with one of them and saying, hey man, like, what's troubling you? Where's your anxiety? I mean, the kind of work that you do as a psychiatrist is probably the closest to coming to that. But I know that we work, I mean, your dad works, my dad works in rural communities, which are definitely Trump communities. But the way that we develop a cultural literacy of how to deal with them, and perhaps more importantly, a cultural empathy of how to have a conversation and have a humanity in these things. For me, when the election happened, I knew the other half of the country that was voting for him, and it's no secret then, and no coincidence, that Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, and Wisconsin created this kind of Rust Belt arc that took him over the top. I mean, this man convinced Western Pennsylvanians that he was going to bring back the coal industry and the steel industry. You go to Pittsburgh today and you ask somebody from Pittsburgh, hey, do you want the steel industry back? They're like, I don't think so. We're still trying to clean off all of the pollution from our walls. We don't want it back. It's gone. But that doesn't help somebody who doesn't have a job and doesn't have the skills and the training for something else. Are we in a position that maybe we can help retrain them for the new economy? Is anybody in Washington addressing that? He at least went ahead and acknowledged that. She didn't. That explains everything.
So, Jazakallah khairan. I want to close, but at the same time, for those few people that are sticking it out, I did want to just close by asking Imam Ali. Imam Ali has a very unique perspective, I think, from all of our background. I mean, Hafiz al-Quran at a very young age. Obviously, his religious knowledge is very much there. He's deeply spiritual. During Ramadan, he guides us during Tahajjud. And then he's now at this stage in his life, he's pursuing a PhD. And I think that to circle that back around, and I think that we've talked about the politics, but we're still Muslim, and we still want to have something that's our faith. So as somebody who obviously is deeply spiritual and is a professional, give us some advice, some concrete advice of something that we can maybe even do tonight, or maybe over the next week or the next month, to ground ourselves in our deen through this time. And then we'll close.
Well, that's a very interesting question. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala provided us with mechanisms to maintain our spirituality, our connection with Him. 5 daily prayers, fasting in the month of Ramadan. And the Prophet ﷺ provided us with extra mechanisms for those who want to do more, especially in the time of uncertainty and anxiety. And looking at the life of the Prophet ﷺ, he did not only perform the fara'id, but he also provided us with this nawafil. And for him, it's very interesting that ﷺ, Qiyamul Layl, or praying at night, was not something optional for him. For Rasulullah was mandatory. And if you look at it, someone was working tirelessly the whole day, talking to the pagan people and leaders of Quraysh, and he was on the top of that required to pray half, 1/3 or 2/3 of the night. One wonders that maybe he deserves some sleep to get some rest in order to be able to do his work next day, but it seems to me, Wallahu A'lam, that and reading so many different ayat of the Quran talking about the pressure the Prophet ﷺ is facing, and connecting this with tasbih, sabbih, isbir ala ma yaquluna wa sabbih, be patient regarding what they say, and make tasbih in the morning and the evening, pray at night. One can imagine that this spiritual power is extremely important as energy supply that really gives us strength and connection. In his hadith, he said, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the strong believer is dearer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than the weak believer. And there's good in both. And many ulama, when they look at the word strong in what sense? And it's very general, strong in spirituality, of course, strong in iman, strong in akhlaq, strong in knowledge, strong in money, in career, in business. Whatever strength we can get, we should actually acquire. As Allah said, وَعِدُّ لَهُمْ مَسَطَعْتُم مِّن قُوَّةٍ. Try to gain all kind of power. So knowledge is power, money is power, career is power, position is power. But the most important source of power for us as Muslims is our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this not only give us spiritual power, but also as a result, as many Sufis, Imam Ghazali and others, they talked about the kind of knowledge, they call it basira. This basar, the eye vision, and basira, the vision of the heart. That some people got this kind of basira, that are guided, they make the right decision, especially in the time of confusion and ups and downs. People don't know what's right and what's wrong. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave some people this kind of basira through which they can see the truth and guide others to this truth. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those who really put their trust in Him, connect themselves with Him. If one takeaway, it would be praying at least 2 rak'ah alone, perhaps with your spouse if possible, or otherwise pray by yourself when nobody sees you, and just to have this very special and personal connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where we are able to raise our concerns and ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for guidance, for strength. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised that those who really put their trust in Him and rely on Him, He'll be always with them. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us among those who connect themselves with Allah, those who are working sincerely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those who receive this special guidance from Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا وأخطأنا ربنا ولا تحمل علينا إصرا كما حملته على الذين من قبلنا ربنا ولا تحملنا ما لا طاقة لنا به واعف عنا واغفر لنا وارحمنا أنت مولانا فانصرنا على القوم الكافرين سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين جزاكم الله